Hey gamers, Gecko here. Welcome back to the show where I fix my bands every 5 seconds because they just keep getting in my eyes. At least I don't have the disintegrating headphones anymore. With news of all the tag games coming out, an interesting issue has reared its ugly head in the FGC once again. For those of you who don't know, 4 tag games are set to release relatively soon. Hunter x Hunter Nen Impact, 2XKO, Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, and Invincible Versus. Now, out of these 4 new games, guess how many of them have motion inputs? Just the one. In an early review from IGN about Invincible Versus, we learn as a community that Invincible Versus does not have special moves. It instead has singular directional inputs that work like special moves, similar to Super Smash Bros. This now makes it the 3rd tag game that is coming out in relatively quick succession to not have motion inputs. Marvel Tokon has thankfully been announced to have motion inputs, however, it apparently has a system where you can choose between motion inputs or simple inputs. We're not entirely sure if this is a Street Fighter 6 system where they are 2 separate controls, or a Granblue system where they are all merged into one, but time will tell. Now, apart from me noticing a couple of things, this has left a bit of a sour taste in the mouths of several people in the FGC. This is a topic that comes around every couple of years. Back when Strive was first releasing, there were several games that were leaning more into the simple input area. And back then, there was a bit of an upcry about it as well. So there may be a couple of you confused on why people are upset that motion inputs are going away. And while I agree with these people that motion inputs are sick and awesome, there may be a couple of you that don't understand the importance of them in fighting games. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to tell you why I love motion inputs and why I really want them to stay in the games. So, what do we actually mean by motion and simple inputs? Well, motion inputs require you to do directional inputs in a sequence in order to execute a special move. The most commonly known one is the quarter circle. You go from down to either forwards or backwards on your movement, and then after that, press a button. Doing that will execute a special move. There are a bunch of these that are still common in fighting games today. Quarter circles, half circles, dragon punch inputs, the GG input, which is a half circle ending in a forward input, a 360. The list can go on, but those are the most common ones. Simple inputs are what they sound like. They are inputs that are done without a motion input. This is generally done at the press of a attack button, and normally is bound to a single direction. 2XKO does it like this. If you remember back in the first Alpha Lab, the only one I got to play, you have 2 special move buttons. Pressing forward or back on the special move buttons would give you different special moves. Pressing them both would give you supers. Now these 2 types of control methods don't necessarily have to exist opposed to each other. You can actually use them together, and several games have started to do this. The most obvious example is Granblue. Granblue has a system in which you can do either a motion input for special moves, or you can do the simple input. The old benefit to the special input was that the cooldown of your move was shortened. However, nowadays, doing a special move input simply gives you a nice reminder on the side of the screen, and a little bit more damage if it's not done from another button. So what are the benefits of simple inputs? Why do developers keep putting them into fighting games? Well, accessibility, for the most part. Motion inputs among people who don't play fighting games are generally seen as quite hard to execute. A lot of people will look at the more complicated inputs like the 360 or the GG input and simply think it's not possible for them. And some of these people are correct. I don't want to make this video out to sound like it's demonizing people who have difficulty executing things. There are real physical and neurological diseases that people can have that make it harder to play fighting games, and that's just how these things are sometimes. Accessibility features for these people are really good, as it means that they're able to experience the parts of the genre that a lot of people like, mainly the mind games, the hard reads, the back and forth between your opponent, that kind of stuff. Nerd shit. They also lower the barrier of entry to the game quite substantially. If you ever talk to someone who doesn't play fighting games, they'll probably say something like, I don't want to have to learn a giant combo string. I don't want to have to do a bunch of inputs memorized in order to win a fight. It's just button mashing. All of these are very Stupid arguments, but it is something that developers hear and try to get around. Simple inputs is a way to deal with that. So what's the benefit of motion inputs? Well, for someone like me, they're a lot cooler. Motion inputs dictate a lot about how a character plays. The Dragon Punch is easily the best example of this. Having it all be forward inputs means that you have to constantly drop your guard anytime you want to go for it. In a lot of games, the Dragon Punch is tied to an invincible move. So if you want to make sure that you can get that invincible move out, you have to momentarily drop your defense so that you can get a bigger reward. Do it at the wrong time and you'll get hit for it. Things like this blown out to a bigger scale can make characters feel completely different. In games with motion inputs, the combos that you do on characters all end up feeling very different by how you use them. Dragon Ball FighterZ is a game that doesn't have a lot of crazy motion inputs. In fact, it's basically all quarter circles and down-down inputs. However, the character I like the most in that game, Trunks, feels very different from several players in the cast due to how his motion inputs work. One of his moves, his flip move, can be enhanced in order to let you steer it in different ways. If you TK the move, doing a motion input on the ground and then ending it with a jump, you're able to get a bunch of speed and distance from it. This makes Trunks feel very different to several other characters in the cast, and allows him to do combos that those characters can't. And it's not like all of the other characters are playing the same, they all have their own moves that they can do. And FighterZ is considered a bad example for this kind of thing. Going to a bunch of older games like Guilty Gear XX, all of the characters feel extremely different just from the moves that they have and the combos that they have to execute. A Kai combo and a Soul combo will never feel the same to do in your hands, and it gives a deeper connection to the characters based entirely off the motion inputs. You may know that I am not a fan of charge characters. In fact, I hate them. And it is entirely because I don't like the feeling of a charge input. If you wanted to turn Guile from a charge character to a character that could just do a sonic boom at the press of a button, 1, you'd break him, but 2, he would feel like a completely different character, and you'd have to make adjustments around that. It feels kind of stupid to say, but it is a very vibes-based feeling. For nerds like me who put hundreds, if not thousands of hours into a bunch of different fighting games, the feeling of hitting motion inputs is really good. It does eventually become something that you don't think about, but that doesn't mean you can't get enjoyment from it. There's also the satisfaction of improving. Let's be real, some motion inputs are quite difficult, especially when you're first learning them. The amount of players that try to do a DP on Wake Up and just mess up the input and then mash a button, it can feel kind of shitty. But once you do eventually get that down and you're able to execute these moves consistently, it can feel absolutely amazing. In fact, it's that feeling that a lot of fighting game players chase. If you're watching this, you're probably very invested in fighting games, like, hello, I'm Gecko Squirrel, of course you are. But you know that feeling of when you lab a combo for ages and you finally get the opportunity to hit it in a match and you actually hit it? That feeling is probably similar to the first time you tried to do a motion input and didn't think you could do it. I remember learning TKO Zansen combos on Baiken because I thought the input was kind of hard. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, I went back to the older Guilty Gear games to see if I could do it. Motion inputs and higher execution barriers give nerds like me something else to strive towards. Removing motion inputs doesn't necessarily mean that this doesn't exist, though. In fact, 2 of the 3 characters that I really like to play in Guilty Gear are simple input characters. Kind of. I've been playing a lot of Unica after she came out, and both Unica and Giovanna have ways to do simple inputs during their combos. Both of them have a stance that they can enter that turns all of their special moves into simple inputs. You can still do the special move input, and for some techniques it's preferred to do the special move input, but you still have the option of simple inputs. But I like how they feel. Giovanna, because it's a bit of a smaller part of her kit, and you still use her normal moves in regular gameplay, plus you do a special move to enter your stance, and Unica because dash cancels exist. It comes from the fact that you're doing dash cancels between the simple inputs. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do in the middle of a match in order to make sure that your pressure is as tight as possible. And if you're like me and you don't use a dash macro, that can be pretty hard, but it's extremely satisfying when you actually do it. Doing a combo that wouldn't work because I managed to get the dash cancel, or hell, even doing pressure that wouldn't work, feels amazing on Unika, even though she has simple inputs. But that's the thing. Something had to be added so that it felt that way. If Unika didn't have the micro dash cancels, I don't think she would be an entertaining character. In fact, I don't think I would play her at all. And that's the feeling that I get from a lot of simple input games. I tried the Net Impact demo, and while I thought it was very silly and kind of fun, I didn't feel anything when doing any of the combos. Granted, I don't spend a lot of time playing versus games nowadays, and I wasn't really labbing my own combos. I was just doing stuff I found on Twitter. But the feeling of doing a simple move into a simple move into another simple move, it wasn't as satisfying. I think the combos I did do would have been more satisfying if they had the motion input element, which is kind of my point here. A lot of the systems that we're talking about are feel and vibe based, which means that they're not for everyone. I've met people in and out of the FGC that like simple inputs in fighting games, generally for more accessibility reasons or just so that they can press buttons and not feel like a shitter. But I am also not alone with saying that I like my motion inputs and I want them to stay. When I play Granblue, I basically never use the simple inputs. In fact, I forget that simple inputs exist until someone points them out to me. That's more of a problem with the fact that I spend like months away from the game and then go back to play it. But still, so for people like me, doing the motion inputs is part of the fun. I'm not saying fighting games without motion inputs shouldn't exist. There should be a wide variety of games. But if a game could have both motion inputs and simple inputs, I think it would just be nice. I think I would prefer 2XGO a lot more if I could do the motion inputs. Not to say that it's a bad game, but doing combos in it doesn't necessarily feel the best. And I will definitely say, hearing that 3 out of the 4 tag games that are coming out don't have them at all really bums me. I think for the average person, motion inputs aren't the issue. There are a lot of video games out there that have motion inputs that aren't fighting games. In fact, there's a lot of competitive games out there that have really high execution stuff that aren't fighting games. I think motion inputs are being misdiagnosed as an issue when they're not the root cause of it. And I hope the developers still find ways to put them in their games. I personally really like how Street Fighter does it with the modern and classic control schemes. Nerds like me can play Street Fighter the way that we've always thought we could, and then people who want to play on a simpler control scheme can play on modern. They have a slight amount of drawbacks, but that doesn't mean that they can't cook with characters. I remember when I consistently went to my local Street Fighter casual night, there was a Luke player there who played on modern controls, and he kicked my ass every night. It wasn't even close. But I hope that they stay in games. Let me know what you guys think, though. How do you feel about motion inputs? How do you feel about simple inputs? Do you agree with me that charge inputs are the devil and should be removed from every fighting game? That's a joke. Let me know in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, why not subscribe? This channel's been doing really well recently, and I kind of want to keep the ball going now that the announcements have dried up a little bit. So if you've got anything you want me to talk about, let me know. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.